citizenship. We have seen built an international system of laws and institutions to protect the freedoms spelled out in the Declaration and to hold violators accountable. We've seen woven into domestic constitutions the idea of human rights from the Declaration, and then been able to make them a crucial test of a government's legitimacy. And we've also learned along the way that respecting and defending human rights makes nations more stable and secure. Now, Eleanor Roosevelt, who did so much to champion the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, knew it was only the first step. From her deathbed, she continued to call out a message to future generations. Staying aloof is not a solution, it is cowardly evasion. She also posed a question that I want all of us to constantly ponder. Where, after all, do human rights begin? In the small places close to home, so close and so small that they cannot be seen on any map of the world. The places here on this campus, in your workplaces, in your communities, where everywhere that men, women, and children seek equal justice, equal opportunity, equal dignity without discrimination, unless those rights have meaning in these small and close places, they will have little meaning anywhere else. Without concerted citizen action to uphold them close to home, we will look in vain for progress in the larger world. I think about Eleanor Roosevelt a lot. I think about her crowning achievement, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, because I often need to be reminded that this is a moment to hold on to the courage of our convictions. It's not easy. In fact, it can be downright difficult and discouraging. But keep in mind not only Eleanor Roosevelt, not only Greta Thunberg, who kept persevering throughout whatever criticism and backlash she experienced, but keep in mind the women that we honor today. We cannot afford to be aloof. We cannot afford to be cowardly. We have to stand together and continue to speak out for the rights, opportunities, and dignity of women, men, and children. Thank you all very much.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much, Secretary Clinton, for being back with us at Georgetown today. We are so grateful to you for your support of the Institute as our honorary founding chair and for your continuing inspiration. It is particularly significant to have you here this day with this focus on human rights, because we are on the threshold of the 25th anniversary of the UN Fourth World Conference on Women that took place in Beijing 25 years ago. And it was your words, human rights are women's rights, and women's rights are human rights, that still echo around the world to this day and remind us of that imperative. And thanks to the Women's Conference, women's rights were chiseled finally into international human rights law. Let me add my welcome to each of you as we come together to recognize and celebrate women's leadership in advancing human rights, justice, and peace. A very special welcome to the family and friends of our honorees. Todos bienvenidos. And I too want to add a special welcome to Mary Robinson. You know, she was the former president of Ireland, she was the former UN envoy on climate, she was the former high commissioner, but she's also a very special friend of the Institute, for which we're very grateful, and has been advising us on our work on gender, conflict, and climate. She is now chair of the elders, so thank you, Mary, for all that you do. And while there are so many important leaders here and our wonderful students, I also want to welcome Rose Styron, the renowned poet and journalist, but more than anything, a strong human rights activist. So thank you, Rose. And to the members of the diplomatic corps who are here, the ambassadors to the United States from Germany, the European Union, Mexico, Chile, Honduras, Afghanistan, New Zealand, and Iceland, a special welcome to Georgetown to all of you. And now to the awards. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, has a commitment to human rights that is deeply personal and lifelong. She was a 23-year-old medical student. Students, think of yourselves as I read this. A 23-year-old medical student when in 1973, General Pinochet came to power in Chile following a coup that overthrew the democratically elected government. Amidst the terror that ensued, she and her family were torn apart. Along with her mother, she was tortured in a notorious detention center and forced into exile. She lost her father, who had been an opponent of the brutal military dictatorship. He died in prison following months of torture. Hers was clearly a first-hand experience with the violation of human rights. After 4 years of exile, first in Australia and then Germany, she was authorized to return back to Chile, where she resumed her studies, eventually specializing in pediatrics and public health. And among her efforts was working for an NGO helping children who were tortured and missing, whose parents were missing. And she advocated for a restoration of Chile's democracy, which was finally realized in 1990. She began a career in government service that led to her becoming Chile's first female Minister of Health, and then later, the first female Minister of Defense. And in that role, among her accomplishments were policies to improve the conditions for women in the military and in the police. Not too long afterwards, in 2006, she was elected President of Chile, the first woman to hold the position, and she was subsequently elected to a second term in 2014. As president, she became a very strong voice for women's progress, appointing female ministers to half her cabinet, creating Chile's first ministry for women and gender equality, and unleashing a series of policies and programs to support women and their families. Unable under the Constitution to run for a successive second term, she was prevailed on by then UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon to become the inaugural executive director of the UN Women and Undersecretary of the UN. And she was a terrific leader to take over that new entity in the United Nations. As head of UN Women, she made women's full participation in conflict resolution and peace processes ending violence against women, and women's economic empowerment among her top priorities. And today she's back at the United Nations as the High Commissioner for Human Rights, appointed by Secretary General Gutierrez last year. And her appointment comes at a very troubling time for our world, with challenges to human rights, to injustice, to inequality on the rise across the world. Everywhere she has spoken out in the strongest terms against the scourge of human rights abuses, from the civilian deaths in Syria to the human rights crises in Venezuela and North Korea, to the treatment of migrant children at the US border and the persecution of the Rohingya people in Myanmar, and so many other abuses in so many places. And most recently, she declared climate change a growing, extremely serious threat to human rights. As she has rightly said, we can only attain peace, security, and sustainable development for all societies when we advance the dignity and equality of all human beings. And now for the citation. For her commitment to public service, for her leadership, her humanity and dedication, for being a voice for the voiceless and an advocate for victims of human rights violations around the world, and for recognizing the rights of women, half the population of this world, still too often marginalized and on the outskirts of opportunity. Georgetown is proud to present the 2019 Hillary Clinton Award for Advancing Women in Peace and Security to the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet.
President De Joya, Secretary Clinton, Ambassador Verveer, queridas Rosa y Marta, friends, it is a great honor for me to accept this award, which bears the name of a woman whose compelling and distinguished example continues to inspire many women and men around the world. Women's leadership is vital to advancing the human rights of all of us. And that leadership takes many forms, from institutions of government to social and political activism, from the home, the community, and the workplace to schools, universities, and the arts. From 16-year-old Greta Thunberg to Jane Goodall, who, like me, is at a more advanced stage of youth. During my presidency, I developed a concept, and I think the people as young as me would like it. I said accumulated youth, because I believe that youth is a matter of to care, not to be indifferent, to have passion for things, and that doesn't end at a certain age. It can increase. Well, and I think Mary can also be a very good example of that. I was saying that from Greta to Jane, women are rising up to demand the world take action to prevent climate change. In Sudan, where a political agreement was signed last month to enable a transition to democracy, young women have been at the forefront of protest and have been called the Kandakas, the title of the queen of the ancient Nubia. Women are mobilizing, again, as we always have, not only for our own rights, but in every kind of movement for human dignity and equality. I am inspired daily by the women and girl activists who defend human rights around the world. And yet, it should not be so arduous a challenge. Women's equality and rights are guaranteed under international law, but the struggle to achieve this elementary justice, this very basic fairness of equal opportunities, is far from over. In reality, women continue to be much poorer than men. They have fewer opportunities, less access to basic services such as education, and a lot less freedom to make their own choices and raise their voice. So it is deeply troubling to see that instead of moving forward, some governments and many lobby groups are pushing back on women's rights. I mean, there's important pushback on human rights as a whole, but particularly as well on women's rights. There seems to be a renewed obsession with controlling and limiting women's decisions over their bodies and lives. We have got to come together to end this injustice. We need to mobilize, hold firm, and advance, because this planet is for all of us. Because ending discrimination against women and girls will generate tremendous and sustainable development gains. Because women's participation in policymaking will improve governance and shape peaceful and secure societies. Because women have rights, and it is time, it is well past time for the universal realization of the equality of every human being. Thank you, Hillary, for the work you have done to drive progress. Thank you, President De Joya. I humbly accept this award on behalf of the women of the world, of the staff of my office, who stand up every day to promote equality, dignity, and human rights. Thank you very much.
Imagínese una niña acá, de que sale de su casa para la escuela, uno le está diciendo, váyase con cuidado. Este municipio está rodeado de narcotráfico. Y ya empezó a organizarse también las maras. Aquí cae todos los días, hay un joven muerto. Ayer fueron 3. Los femicidios es la tasa más alta que ha habido en Choloma. Las obligan a vender las drogas cuando las mujeres no quieren. Entonces lo que se hace es matarlas. Usted va a ver que todos los días sale gente con niños.
La violencia actual es tan brutal como la guerra misma, y la gente le duele. Nadie se levanta en la mañana diciendo, mi sueño es que yo quiero dejar mi terruño, yo quiero dejar mi familia, yo quiero dejar a mis hijos, quiero dejar a mi abuela. Es importante comprender de que no nos vamos porque queremos.
Que tienen que haber cambios, tienen que haber cambios. La misión es empoderar a las mujeres con enfoque de género para que aprendan sus derechos. Siempre estamos, porque siempre están buscando el servicio de nosotros.
Yo inicié el trabajo en centros penitenciarios y con, digamos, aquellos jóvenes que yo podía ver en la calle, que sabía que no tenían oportunidades.
A la vez que nos ayudan,
tanto desde aquellos que han perpetrado la violencia y que dicen basta, con aquellos que han sido víctimas de violencia y dicen basta. Y encontrar ese punto, esos dos océanos, esa es la visión de futuro.
Virginia Marta Velázquez is on the front lines working to address the unrelenting violence and assault on human rights in the Northern Triangle of Central America. She works in Choloma, Honduras, one of the most dangerous cities in the world. Gang violence and drug trafficking infiltrate all aspects of life. Impunity is unchecked, and the toll on women is staggering. Since 1992, Marta and her organization, Movimiento de Mujeres de la Colonia López Arreo, MOMUCLA, have been supporting the women of Choloma. Marta began organizing women when she was 23. After attending a meeting in the Honduran capital, where she learned of women's legal rights, she decided she needed to return home to create an organization whose mission would be to empower women, to teach them their rights, and help them to overcome the violence in their everyday lives. She faced enormous opposition from the men in the community, and the women told her it was too dangerous to do what she wanted to do. But despite the concerns, she founded MOMUCLA with a small group of other women. The organization quickly evolved into a movement, enabling women to empower themselves against some of the worst human rights violations. Half the women in Honduras are killed by drug cartels and gangs, and their methods are among the most brutal imaginable. In 2017, 41% of women and girls killed in Honduras showed signs of torture, mutilation, disfigurement, and cruelty beyond what was needed to kill them. Today, MOMUCLA provides first response and long-term support for the women of Choloma. Some have survived machete strikes and gunshots. Many find themselves homeless. Women are often killed, assaulted, and robbed, returning home from work at night. The center provides emotional, psychological, and legal support. And with little government protection against the violence, the women of MOMUCLA have mediated community conflicts, gone to homes as a group to stop violence, and brought male perpetrators to the police. They work with law enforcement and judges and fight for reforms. They collected 50,000 signatures to push the Honduran Congress to adopt a domestic violence law. They lobbied for funding for a bridge over a dangerous freeway, and for potable water, and for a kindergarten. Today, MOMUCLA has almost 700 members. Women no longer see themselves as victims, but as agents for change. And Marta, at 70 years plus, is going strong, providing hope and optimism despite the dangerous environment in which she and her fellow citizens live. And now for the citation. For her courage to lead despite enormous personal risk, and for instilling courage in the women of Choloma to stand up to violence and demand justice, for providing a community of support to the victims of violence and enabling them to recover and become empowered. Georgetown is proud to present the 2019 Hillary Clinton Award for advancing women in peace and security to Virginia Marta Velázquez. El Salvador has endured decades of civil conflict, drug trafficking, and extremely violent gangs. Rosa Anaya is a beacon of hope amidst the deadly conflict. She was born shortly after the 1975 student massacre, when dozens of students were killed and injured in a protest. They were protesting the closing of their university and widespread government military action against dissenters. Her parents were human rights defenders. Her father was murdered for his activism. Her mother was tortured while she was pregnant with Rosa. El Salvador was ravaged by civil war and violent repression for more than a decade. Over 70,000 civilians were killed, including several Jesuits, US nuns, and Bishop Oscar Romero. At the age of 10, Rosa and her family fled their country, first to Canada and then to the United States. And as a refugee, she would go to schools and churches and inform Americans about what was happening in her country. She was selected to speak at the United Nations General Assembly on the rights of children in war zones. As a teenager, she returned home to El Salvador, to a generation that had never experienced peace. She began working in prisons with young men as she tried to understand why her country, even after a peace agreement, could not overcome a persistent state of war and violence. She gradually came to see that the perpetrators of violence were also victims of violence. She believed that to promote human rights and peace, one must defend all people, including those who caused harm. She began her pioneering efforts in restorative justice and the promotion of reconciliation as a critical step to healing a society. Today, Rosa is the program coordinator of Segundas Oportunidades, or Second Chances, an initiative of Catholic Relief Services to rehabilitate inmates in 4 prisons, to prepare them to return to society and the workforce. She and her team support prisoners with cognitive behavioral therapy, with workshops to deconstruct toxic masculinity, and provide tools to negotiate and resolve conflict. The program helps the inmates to become promoters of peace. She also works with young men in their communities to help them find alternatives to joining gangs and to provide them with skills the country needs. She has a dream that one day the prisons will turn into schools and peace will prevail. And now for the citation. For working to address the root causes of violence through interventions with prisoners, to shift norms from violence to peace. For working to change the lives of the vulnerable and provide them with skills and a path to a better future. And for acting on the belief that every human being matters, that human rights matter, and that a peaceful and just future for El Salvador is truly possible. For all of this, Georgetown is proud to present the Hillary Clinton Award for Advancing Women, Peace, and Security to Rosa Anaya. We're going to have a chance now for you to hear a little bit from Secretary Clinton and the awardees through some questions we have, and then some student questions as well. Hi, Commissioner Bachelet. You have spoken out countless times against the dire human rights crises around the world, from the Rohingyas in Myanmar to what is happening to the Syrians in their own country. And most recently, you said that climate change is going to be the worst human rights violation the world has ever seen because of the potential of its scope if we don't act now. So, with all of this happening, and with the responsibilities that you have in your position, how do you deal with these crises? Are there some that take priority over others? But where do you gain hope that we can make progress on these issues?
I thought you were going to ask me, why did you accept the job? But
well, I've already talked to you about that.
No, the truth is that we are living in a very complex world, and I think Secretary Clinton mentioned it very, very clearly in her remarks. And we see a pushback on human rights because of all this, if I would say, leaders who don't believe that multilateralism is important, that believe that every country can solve their problems by their own. And you have mentioned many challenges. There are global challenges. I mean, when we're talking about climate change, we're talking about migration, when we're talking about diseases, we saw it with the Ebola disease in some countries, and so on. We could go and on, and all the challenges that humankind is facing today are not challenges that can be solved by one country alone. And on the other hand, nobody can stand sidelines when we deal with these kind of issues. So what to do? On one hand, we have been seeing that if I would say, in the heart of many of the human rights violations, we see inequalities. When you see conflicts, I mean, you go to some countries and you see that in many African countries, 70% of the population is under 30 or under 35%. But on the other hand, on that ages, 70% are unemployed. So people without hopes, without opportunities, and then come these groups, different kind of groups that are armed. They propose them a weapon, power, money, a future, and sometimes religious ideas as well. And then you have lots of young people going into this group. So but it's linked to poverty, to inequalities. In some places, people live there, but climate change has produced huge droughts or floodings, or the ocean levels have risen and they have to leave their coastal villages. So they are either internally displaced, either have to migrate to other places. So why I'm mentioning these things? Because it's not only that climate change itself will produce a lot of effects, but also because it's this sort of intersectoriality of situations that all combined is like the worst perfect storm. And so we see poverty, insecurity, like we have seen in Central America, but also climate change. Because what I've been told is that many of the coffee production, the viruses have come that have produced less production, and many people have been left unemployed. So, and climate change will produce all of those things. And people will be, and not will be, the problem are right now dealing with many things. We will have water scarcity. And what is going on today in, for example, the Sahel region in Africa, is you see these fights between herders and people who work on the farmers, if I may say. And they're fighting because there's not enough land and there's no water. And they're killing themselves. It's not that they are arguing, they're killing themselves. And every time there is a conflict, we're talking among communities, we're not talking about armed groups. And you see 200 people killed in one of those things. So we see today the world that's not addressing many of these issues are having already terrible effects. But if this we cannot stop this from happening. It can only get worse in terms of food security, in terms of livelihoods, and in terms of peace and security.
And I think that we need to, and that's what I think Greta intended to do, is to try to, and that's why she was so frustrated and so angry, if I might say. And I was a Saturday at the Youth Summit, and they were angry with us, the older people and leaders and so on. And I think, but I think it's good to see that young people are moving. There is a lot of things like bottoms up going on. And as my colleagues here, they are from Grassroots, and so we need that. We need leaders to take action, but we need community to take action, because at the end, climate change, we all need to be part of the solution, because it will also depend on how we change patterns of consumption, and that will mean patterns of production can be changed as well. So we all need to work very strongly on that. That's why I said that climate change is one of the biggest threats. It's not something that I found out now. Being a president, I did a lot of things on this, because I really understood that this is a terrible threat for all of us. And I really believe that we still can do things to stop it.
Yes. You know, that's a very... You've really put this in perspective. And I remember when Mary Robinson and I had the privilege to be with you when you were president recently, the most recent presidency, and we went out to meet with some of the grassroots Chilean women who were trying already to deal with the fact that the land was drying up. They didn't know how they were going to be productive farmers and what their potential was. And it's one of the reasons we at the Institute are really looking at this issue and trying to put a sense of urgency under it, because women are doing this hard work, and as well as men and others, the young people. But the reality is it is leading increasingly to potential conflict and enormous displacement. And I don't think we have a sense, and thank you for saying what you said about the gravity of the situation. So Rosa, as you know, we in the United States have seen, read about, heard, been threatened over the fact that there are many refugees and asylum seekers coming to the United States border, driven from your country as well as other countries in Central America. And unfortunately, this is often a source of great political antagonism. What would you like the American people to know about the situation in your country, what it's undergoing, so that we could understand why this is happening?
4 minutes, huh?
What? We will let you go longer.
Well, first of all, I would really like to thank everybody here and this incredible women right next to me. It's an honor to be next to all of you, because I think that I do believe that we will change this world if we truly give the opportunity to women to create a space that we've seen can be different. I think that one of the most important things that I would like people to understand is that, like I said in the video, we don't choose to leave. The conditions are terrible in some of the places, and migration, you know, it's a right, and asylum is a protected right by international law. And I wouldn't be telling you this story, I wouldn't be alive here today if the solidarity of the people of the United States and various points in my life wouldn't have literally saved us from being killed. And I do the work I do because I was able to be protected, if you will, from hatred, from vengeance, from thinking that there was no hope, because I experienced that solidarity myself. It is very hard for people sometimes to understand that in El Salvador and many countries in the world, we are all just really hard trying to make a better world, because this is the only planet that we have. And you know, at some point people were asking me, why do you do the work you do? And I was kind of, you know, I do it for my children, yes, but then my oldest daughter, the night before I was coming here, she told me something that just made me realize that, you know what, I don't. I do this for this generation, for my generation, to prove that we will be better. You know, Greta is angry, and I agree with her to be angry, but I also think that in every one of us, there will be, at some points, we need to find a solution. We can focus on the problem, or we can start to be creative. And this, human beings, we are just incredible in being creative in what we do. So migration will not stop with hard hand policies or zero tolerance policies. Migration will only be stopped if we create the opportunities that we deserve in our own countries. The opportunity to choose whether we want to migrate or not. The right to dream a different place where we can live, and in a vida digna, we say. To have, you know, to have a tree in our backyard has become something so hard. And we can't allow that to continue to happen.
Thank you. So Marta, tell us a little bit about how the organization you founded and still continue to guide, Mamukla, combats this kind of violence. What interventions have had the most impact in the work that you do in your community? And I know this is hard. What gives you the hope for tomorrow?
Bueno, buenos días a todos y todas, y muchas felicidades a todas por este honor, ¿verdad? Este premio que he dedicado a todas las mujeres, especialmente aquellas que han dado la vida por nosotras.
So good morning, and thank you to
Para
everyone.
que yo en
Thank you
estos
for this
momentos
award.
esté aquí. Se me pregunta que
So I just wanted to start this morning by thanking you for this award that is devoted to all women and their work for peace.
Bueno, se me pregunta qué hemos hecho nosotras como Mamukla en la comunidad. Nosotras trabajamos en las diferentes comunidades, organizando a las mujeres, enseñándoles sobre sus derechos, porque todavía estamos en el siglo XXI y se nos mancía, se nos discrimina nuestros derechos. Estamos en la lucha sobre este sistema patriarcal, donde todavía la lucha de las mujeres es invisibilizada.
So your question to me was, what is it that we do from the standpoint of Mamukla? Well, in Mamukla, we work in our community, we work in many communities to organize women and to teach women about their rights, because even though we are in the 21st century right now, women continue to face discrimination, and we need to continue to fight for our rights and fight against the patriarchy to make sure that our rights become more visible.
Todos los días, al levantarnos, como decía, nos vemos con que una mujer fue asesinada, ya que el lugar donde yo vivo, el municipio de Choloma, es el lugar más violento en Honduras. Desgraciadamente, tenemos que luchar, ir a consolar a los familiares de estas víctimas y a brindarles un poco de terapias. Buscamos psicólogas para que nos apoyen en este sentido, abogadas para que también se pueda hacer justicia, para que se lleven a juicio los asesinos de estas víctimas, porque la realidad es que solo un 9% de los asesinatos en Honduras han sido judicializados.
Each day when we awaken, we hear news of yet another woman who has been murdered. We're in Choloma. Choloma, where I am from, is one of the most violent cities in all of Honduras. And unfortunately, after these events, we are tasked with consoling the families of the victims. We try to provide them with therapy. We seek out psychologists to help them out, as well as attorneys, because we want the perpetrators of this violence to be brought to justice. The truth is, in Honduras, only 9% of murders are prosecuted.
Tengo tiempo.
Do I still have more time?
La justicia de nosotras, solo para darles un ejemplo, en este momento estamos apoyando a 4 fiscales del Ministerio Público, 4 muchachas que han puesto la denuncia contra el mismo fiscal coordinador con las que ellas están trabajando. Entonces, imagínense, nosotras que vamos a poner la denuncia al Ministerio Público, que somos de base, que somos simples empleadas domésticas, se nos discrimina. Y las mismas empleadas fiscales, abogadas, están violando sus derechos porque son acosadas sexualmente. Entonces, solo de ahí, miren la clase de justicia que tenemos.
Just to give you an example in terms of the justice system that we have to deal with, we are currently working with 4 prosecutors in the public prosecution ministry. There were 4 women who denounced actions by the coordinating prosecutor. The coordinating prosecutor was involved in discrimination and harassment. So if you can imagine, the public prosecution ministry is where we need to go seek justice. We're simple grassroots workers, and yet the very employees of that public prosecution ministry are the ones often violating the rights of the women whose cases we have to bring to them.
Well, I don't know how you greet each day, but we're grateful that you do and make such a difference. Secretary Clinton, you had mentioned the situation of women in Afghanistan in your remarks, and we have a question from Matthew Jenstead from the School of Foreign Service. He's a graduate student. And he asked the following question. The United States has been engaged in negotiations to withdraw from Afghanistan. While progress has been stalled, it seems inevitable that we are headed toward a world in which the Taliban will be a legitimate political actor in the future. How can the United States prepare to leave Afghanistan in a way that preserves the hard-won gains on women's rights, particularly in education?
Well, thanks for that question, because it's something that we should all give some thought to. We've been involved, as you all know so well, for a very long time. And as President DeGioia pointed out, I am one of the honorary co-chairs of Georgetown's program on behalf of Afghan women, along with Laura Bush. And I would make just 3 points. First, there is an election in Afghanistan that's starting today, and it is under tremendous threat from the Taliban, threatening people not to vote, trying to continue to delegitimize the government of the country. I'm hoping that the election continues and concludes, and the outcome will create support for the new government. Because at the end of the day, one of the problems that we have faced going back 2 administrations before this one is the refusal of the Taliban to negotiate with the government of Afghanistan. Originally, it was because the government had been installed by the international community, which was the only option since it was impossible to do otherwise at the time. But since then, there have been elections, not perfect, but you know, we have a little experience ourselves with not perfect elections. And so I think that the fact is that they were judged to be free and fair, even with all their flaws. And so governments were installed. But the Taliban refused to negotiate with the recognized government. That makes it really hard to create the conditions for any kind of lasting peace and security. And I do not agree with the recent effort undertaken by the current administration, which was to reach an agreement with the Taliban and then basically to tell the government of Afghanistan, here's the agreement. It fell apart for both legitimate and crazy reasons, and so everybody's kind of back at it. But here's the challenge for the United States, is if we cannot help to facilitate a legitimate peace agreement, and it's not unusual for armed groups to join new governments so long as they forswear the use of arms. So long as they say we are transforming ourselves from an insurgency, a guerrilla operation, a militia, into a political party, and we will compete on those grounds. The Taliban has never been willing to make that kind of commitment. That must be part of any ongoing peace negotiations, as must be the protection of human rights, not only for women, but for all Afghan people. Because the gains, which are often not covered or understood by the press here and around the world, are significant. You know, women have been going to school, they have been starting businesses, they have been speaking out, they have been serving in the parliament. And so the gains from the end of the Taliban period to today are significant. And I do not want to see the clock turn back on the entire country, and particularly on the women of Afghanistan. So any kind of resumption of peace negotiations should be led by whoever the new government is. The United States and the international community should be facilitating that. Now, if the Taliban refuses to participate, there has to be some effort to find whatever leverage we can to entice them to participate. Because here is their problem. Their problem is that they are now starting to compete for land and power with ISIS, with other kinds of militia-type groups. So there should be a way that patient, intelligent diplomacy, which I have seen and which I applaud, can begin to try to move the parties towards some resolution. And so, Milan, I think you have been a tremendous support and advocate for the Afghan women. And yes, we want to end our combat role. We want to continue to support the Afghan military, which is doing most of the fighting and dying, by the way. And we want to create the best possible environment for there to be some kind of peace agreement that politicizes differences as opposed to weaponized differences. And we cannot walk away from the involvement of women. And I personally would like to see Afghan women at any peace table for future negotiations.
President Bachelet, we've got 2 student questions here that are similar in their questioning. Eshan Gupta, the School of Foreign Service 23, asks, what role do women's rights activists in developed countries have in the promotion of the rights of women in developing countries? And she asks, like in India or many of the countries in the Middle East. And then another student, Amritha Ramaljinam, and I'm sorry if I'm butchering your name, College 23. What obstacles have you faced, are facing women who are trying to make social change? And how would you suggest young women like those of us who are interested in this area go about tackling human rights issues, often those that impact women in a negative way, yet in international bodies that are still male-dominated?
Well, thank you for that questions. I would say that the first thing is that when I mentioned before that human rights is having a pushback in the global communities, because you cannot imagine how difficult it is in any discussion, negotiation, or resolution to even include the word human rights. And we have seen it just last week on the discussion and resolution of universal health coverage, that some countries, I'm not going to mention which country, but you know it very well, did not want it to include the possibility of sexual and reproductive rights, of women's rights, and some other stuff in terms of the provision of services. And also in a discussion a couple of months ago in the Security Council on a resolution that it was very good on gender violence, on conflict, women who were raped. It was completely, the whole resolution is pretty good, but it was completely impossible to include, because it was vetoed by a country, that women who had been victims of gender-based violence in conflict or rape should have access to sexual and reproductive services. So when we're not talking about women of the world, we're talking about women who are victims of violence in conflict, or sexual violence. So I would say we're living that situation, and you mentioned Hillary and Milan. This year we have Cairo plus 25 in Nairobi, and again, the discussion in the international community of the member state has been very difficult. So in many places, when you think how we can move forward for human rights, the thing is we're trying to maintain what we have. And the same for next year, Beijing plus 25 is the same, because we want to not try to get backwards, because many people, many member states are pushing backwards. And so we really need you. We really need your voices, your organization. You really need women and men, because this is not a women's issue. There is everyone's issues, to be standing up, to raise their voices, to organize, to support other women's organizations. The first thing I would say to young people, organize yourself, vote, elect good leaders. That's the one thing everywhere is important. Even dare you to be elected. Present yourself to different positions. We need young people. We need, the rest can also present themselves, but we need young people to be there, to remind us, to dare thinking out of the box, to giving new creative ideas, new forms of engaging more people. How can you support from developed countries, organizations for developing countries? Well, today I believe that through technology, there's a lot of possibility of communicating all over the world. You don't need to go physically. You can think on programs that can support either women in terms of their knowledge, the capacity building in terms of skills, on advocacy, on what their rights are, like the women who are here with me do at the grassroots level. But also you can support, depending on your area, women who wants to make an entrepreneurship or something. You can mentor, support, but mainly build, if I would say, because I think when you have a pushback on women's rights and gender rights, what we need is not only to talk to the converted ones, to be among us, but also to build big constituencies. Because today there's a lot of human rights organizations, human rights defenders, but they're all working in silos. People who work on environment, people who work on LGBTI issues, people who work on women's, and so on. And we need to make our voices being heard louder. So for that, we need to build stronger constituencies. And I think you need here in the US to build strong constituencies. Because I've been in many meetings with NGOs, and I thought they're going to say to me, how can we help you? And they said, how can you help us? Our rights in many areas and in many states there are a lot of pushback on different legislation. So I think, and I think that, of course, you can be part of the international community. You can participate in different activities. You can, I would say, produce some movements. You can, like the Me Too movement that has been everywhere. In Latin America, it's ni una menos, no? Or ni una más, depending if you want to say not one more death or not one women less. So I think it's a lot of things to do. There's a lot of women's network, but please get involved. Take contact with you. In India, for example, because I've been there, that's a lot of work done. And I think everything that you can do to support other countries. But on the other hand, support yourself here too. You need it here too. Thank you.
Thank you. And we're going to end with two questions that have a similar theme to Rosa and Marta. Tessa Bluckle of the Global Human Development Master's Program asked, on days when mistakes are made, when things go wrong, what do you hold on to know your value and the importance of the work you do? And then from Cale Reeves, School of Foreign Service 23, how have you remained with strength, grace, and positive energy at a time when the politics of division and so much else affects life? How would you advise us students to build resilience and maintain our commitments so our voices can make a difference?
Thank you for those questions. So for me, it's very hard to do the work we do because you saw the pictures there, right? We're not working with the classic, poor kid that is in a very harsh situation. For us, I'm sitting next to Marta here, who really is working with those women who have suffered the violence directly and who have been traumatized. And so it's very hard for me to talk about this publicly in the first place. But I have to remember always that the day that we buried my father, my mom stood up in the church and said her words were of forgiveness for the person who killed my father, as he is right there in front of her in his coffin. So for me to remember all of us, that if we are to stop the cycle of violence, we need to start by modeling what that interruption means. And if it means for me to be hugging the person who killed my father, that's what I'm going to do. And that is literally what we are doing. It is very hard to do this because it takes time. There is no magic in this. It takes a lot of respect for the victims. We have to be reminded how much it hurts. And I would like you to, one of our biggest tools, look at the person next to you. Look at the person next to you. Yeah. Tell that person, big smile, first of all. Big smile, right? Say thank you for being the human being that might be ready to change the world. Tell it. Please do. Come on. Come on. Shake hands. Come on, shake hands. It's okay. Give him a hug if you're willing. Yes. You see what I just did right here? I've done this with 800 gang members in front of me. I am here to tell you that we can change and rehabilitate people. I am here to tell you that violence needs to stop, but not based on impunity. Justice must be served, but justice is not vengeance. If we continue to think that doing vengeance, we are going to have our justice, let me tell you that your liver is going to suffer quite a bit. I choose not to be eaten by hate. I choose every day to think about the person who was able to torture, to kill, and that every day today might be doing the same thing. What have we done as a society? What have we done so wrong that our children are willing to go to a gang instead of coming back home? What is our problem as a society that we are not giving our kids the love that they need and deserve, that they think that the better option to gain respect is a gang? It is not the gang's fault. That is on us. We have created this society by action or omission. So everything that you do could either change the life of a person or can just, toss it to the end of a cliff. We need to make the conscious choice to be peace builders, because violence often, violence chooses for us. And we have to choose not to continue down that path. Even think about the person you hate the most. You have that person in your head? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's gonna be the same for everybody.
Would you be willing to forgive that person? Yeah. Yeah. So the task isn't easy when we say human rights are for all, because we first have to think that human rights are for those who we hate the most, but we need to respect and we need to find common ground to build a different world.
Thank you. So, Marta, what does it take?
Bueno, ya decía Rosa que tenemos que radiar esa alegría, aunque a veces tenemos rabias, pero son procesos también de ir sacando. Cuando aprendemos a querernos, cuando valoramos nuestro cuerpo, nuestra persona, empezamos a ver el amor en otras. Y eso es lo que tenemos que hacer. Ir queriéndonos nosotras mismas y nosotros mismos para poder reflejar el amor para otras. Porque a veces la vida se vive demasiado a prisa. Se piensa trabajar, trabajar, trabajar. ¿Qué voy a dejar? ¿Qué voy a hacer? Pero no se piensa en el amor. Y si no hay amor, entonces no estamos haciendo nada, aunque estemos acumulando bienes. Eso se deja, pero el amor se da, se recibe y es recíproco. Y a través de ese amor conseguimos lo que queremos.
Well, I think Rosa already said it all, but what we really need to do is we need to spread and radiate happiness. We all have anger, we all have things that we're angry about, and we have to get it out. But it's only in loving ourselves and loving our bodies that we are able to then begin to see love in others. And if in doing that and starting with ourselves, we are able to visualize that in others. So without love, our lives are very fast, and they're fast-paced, and we all have things to do. There's a lot going on. And so we're very focused on accumulating goods and getting ahead. But without love, having those goods does nothing. Love is something that we feel for ourselves and we feel for each other. It's something reciprocal, and that's the way to move on.
So from our human rights activists, reconciliation, forgiveness, outreach, love. Maybe we too can create a better world. So let's thank them for their courage and leadership and all that they do. So thank you all again for coming. It takes a village to make a day like this happen. And I just want to thank Mary and Jeff, and especially Allie Smith, who was our coordinator writ large, and our fabulous army of students who helped us get to this day. So thank you all, and to everybody I didn't mention. And if I can just ask that you remain in your seats until our guests leave, and then go and enjoy the day. Thank you all.